For 12 years, Daniel Reeves had sat in this pew alone. This Tuesday, someone slid in beside him. The stranger's shoulder brushed his charcoal sport coat, and then a voice, low and insistent, reached his ear.
Don't react.
Daniel turned his head. The face inches away was a face he had buried in a closed casket, his brother's face, older, lined, alive. This can't be real. The priest's voice droned through the Eucharistic prayer. Daniel's hands, clasped around his gold wedding band, had gone cold. At the final blessing, the stranger rose without another word, slipped past the open doors, and vanished into daylight. Daniel searched the parking lot. The old sedan, the empty spaces. No one. I saw him. I know what I saw. He stood at his truck, staring at the church doors, a question burning. Ghost or miracle? He drove the sedan out of the lot, the rosary clicking against the windshield with every bump, his knuckles white on the wheel. At the first bend past the cemetery, he pulled onto the gravel shoulder and killed the engine, the morning silence pressing in like a verdict. In that quiet, the memory came uninvited, a midnight phone call 12 years old. A dispatcher's strained voice. There'd been a fire. His brother was inside the warehouse. A fire captain met him at the yellow tape, voice practiced in tragedy, and said what they say when there are no survivors. 2 days later, in the cold fluorescence of the medical examiner's office, they placed dental x-rays on a metal desk and asked him to verify. He signed the papers. The casket stayed closed, polished mahogany under white lilies, sealing a grief he couldn't look at. At the funeral, condolences washed over him like a tide he couldn't feel. Only the weight of the coffin remained. Back in his kitchen, morning light fell on a framed photo of 2 young brothers. He pressed his thumb to Richard's grin. It can't be. Next morning, before the sun cleared the steeple, Daniel pushed through the iron cemetery gate, its creak the only sound. He knelt on the damp grass before the granite stone, the carved name familiar as his own heartbeat. I saw your face in that pew, Rich. Tell me I'm not losing my mind. Wet grass rustled behind him. Slow footsteps, deliberate, stopped just short of the grave. The charcoal-coated stranger from the church stepped out of the tree line, morning light catching the silver in his hair.
You're not losing your mind, Dan. It's me.
The voice was older, frayed at the edges, but the rhythm was Richard's, unmistakably Richard's. Daniel rose on unsteady legs, the dampness on his trousers forgotten. Rich? How? The name Rich caught in his throat, and the question dissolved into silence as he stared at the impossible, undeniable truth standing over his own grave. Richard knelt beside him, the headstone between them like a door neither could close.
The fire was real, Dan. I was inside. I got out. But the 2 men who were after me, they didn't.
After you? Who were they?
Men working for a man I owed money to. A dangerous man.
The dental records. They said it was you.
Forged. A man at the medical examiner's office owed me a favor. I paid for silence.
Daniel's jaw tightened. The lies stacked against 12 years of grief, each one a new weight on his chest. 12 years, Rich. 12 years of visiting a grave with an empty box. Richard had no answer. He just stood there, the weight of his own survival pressing him into the earth beside his name. Daniel sat down heavily on the grass, his legs giving out, waiting for more. Richard lowered himself onto the stone bench beside his brother, and the whole truth began to pour out.
I was an accountant at Cole Manufacturing. I started skimming to cover a gambling debt. The debt grew. I went to a loan shark named Greco. When I missed a payment, he sent men.
He described the night of the fire, 2 enforcers cornering him, a struggle, a chemical barrel tipping, then flames everywhere. When the smoke cleared, Richard was already gone.
I took a bus to Halifax, lived under a false name for 12 years. Worked cash jobs, kept my head down. Never made a friend. 6 weeks ago, I saw Greco's obituary online. Cancer, so I booked a flight. I want to make it right, Dan. Will you help me?
The question hung between them, unanswered, as the morning sun climbed over the headstones. He drove home in a daze, the weight of Richard's plea pressing his shoulders into the worn fabric of his armchair. Margaret should be here. She'd know how to make this right. Rain streaked the window as he set the frame down and walked to the kitchen. He pulled a crumpled savings statement from the drawer, the numbers blurring until he blinked them clear. $146,000, every cent he had spent 30 years saving. It would leave me with nothing, but it could buy Richard a chance. He reached for the phone and dialed a number he knew from an old case, a criminal defense attorney named Lauren Kessler. Lauren, it's Daniel Reeves. I need your advice on a hypothetical. Strictly confidential. The voice on the other end paused, then agreed to meet the next morning. The house settled into silence, but for the first time in 12 years, the silence held a direction. The next morning, Daniel walked into the law office of Kessler and Associates, the weight of his charcoal sport coat feeling more like a disguise than armor.
Daniel, it's good to see you. Have a seat.
Thank you for seeing me, Lauren. The hypothetical I mentioned, it isn't hypothetical.
I assumed as much. Tell me what we're dealing with.
Daniel laid out the story. A brother dead for 12 years, a faked death, embezzlement, and a man who wanted to turn himself in.
The charges are serious: insurance fraud, embezzlement, identity concealment. But voluntary surrender with full restitution carries considerable weight with the court.
What's the catch?
The insurance company is auditing old fire claims. If they connect his survival to the 2013 payout before he's in custody, he could face 5 years or more. He needs to move now.
Daniel's mind calculated the restitution, $146,000, every cent he had saved. The only bridge back. He thanked Lauren, shook her hand, and walked out with a timetable that left no room for hesitation. Daniel found Richard at a back booth in a coffee shop near the old high school, 2 untouched cups between them. Lauren says voluntary surrender with full restitution could get you a reduced sentence, but we have to move now. The insurance company is already digging.
You'd use your retirement money for me? After what I did?
You're my brother. I mourned you for 12 years. I'm not losing you again.
I don't deserve it.
Deserve? Grace isn't about deserve. It's about family. For a long moment, Richard stared into his coffee, his throat working silently.
All right. What do I need to do?
Meet me and Lauren at the police station at 8 a.m. sharp. Neither man finished his coffee. They walked out into the evening with a fragile accord, the ghost of 12 years slowly losing its grip. Before the sun crested the parish roof, Daniel stood at the bank counter and traded a lifetime of careful deposits for one cashier's check. An hour later, he walked into Lauren's office where Richard was already waiting, his hands clasped like a schoolboy awaiting a sentence. Lauren laid the restitution agreement across the polished desk and slid the check into place with a paperclip.
This demonstrates good faith. It will matter to the judge.
Dan, that's your whole life.
It's just money. You're my blood. Richard's jaw tightened, but no words came. He just nodded, once.
We'll present the self-surrender package first thing in the morning. Are you both ready?
We're ready. The rest of the paperwork took only minutes. When they rose, the check lay clipped to the file, a silent testimony to the cost of resurrection. That evening, the phone rang in Daniel's kitchen, slicing through the silence like a fire alarm.
Daniel, the insurance investigator is already requesting the original fire marshal's report. They're going to find the forgery.
How long do we have?
Possibly days. Maybe less. If Richard is arrested, the voluntary surrender advantage evaporates.
In his mind, the legal documents from that morning flickered. The check, the signatures, the fragile window now closing. Daniel thanked her and hung up. 12 years of grief, and now the last hours were a sprint. He dialed Richard's number before the receiver had settled, the weight of the call pressing his chest. Change of plans. We go in at 7 a.m. sharp. The insurance company is moving faster than we thought. A moment later, his phone buzzed with a single line from Richard. I'll be ready. Outside, the municipal police station stood dark and silent against the night sky, waiting for the morning that would decide everything. At 6:55, Daniel's sedan rolled into the police station lot, gravel crunching under the tires like a countdown. Inside, fluorescent lights washed the lobby colorless, and a desk sergeant looked up with practiced indifference.
I'm here to speak with someone about a warrant. The name is Michael Brennan.
The sergeant flipped through a clipboard, finding nothing, and opened his mouth to dismiss him.
My real name is Richard Reeves. I'm here to surrender in connection with a 2013 warehouse fire.
Lauren Kessler stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the counter.
My client is voluntarily surrendering. All relevant documentation and a cashier's check for full restitution are enclosed.
The officer's eyebrow lifted, but he took the folder and dialed an internal extension. Within 15 minutes, Richard stood in handcuffs, cold metal stark against his worn sweater. As a deputy led him toward holding, he glanced back at Daniel. Daniel held his gaze and nodded once, a blessing and a goodbye. 3 days later, the preliminary hearing convened in a wood-paneled courtroom, the air thick with old varnish and consequence. Lauren Kessler stood and addressed the bench, her voice measured and clear.
Your Honor, Mr. Reeves voluntarily surrendered, delivered full restitution of $146,000, and has cooperated fully. We ask the court to recognize this as genuine remorse.
The judge, a woman with tired eyes and a deliberate pace, reviewed the file and peered over her glasses at Richard. Given the voluntary nature and restitution, I sentence you to 22 months in a minimum security facility. Richard exhaled a breath he'd been holding since Halifax, his shoulders dropping visibly. In the gallery, Daniel gripped the wooden railing, the grain pressing into his palms.
He got the best possible deal.
As the bailiff led Richard out, he turned toward the gallery. No words, just a silent mouthing of 2 syllables that Daniel read clearly. That afternoon, Daniel drove home past the minimum security facility, low buildings behind a single fence, a new clock ticking in his chest. 2 weeks later, Daniel queued at the prison gate, his charcoal coat swapped for a simple jacket, a visitor's pass clipped to his pocket. The visitation room hummed with muted conversations. He sat before a thick glass pane, the black phone cold in his hand. On the other side, a steel door opened and Richard shuffled in, beige inmate clothes hanging too loose on his frame.
Richard lifted the phone. Dan.
Daniel pressed the receiver tight. How are you holding up?
Richard's eyes dropped. It's strange, but I deserve to be here. Thank you for coming.
Daniel leaned closer to the glass. I'll be here. Every other weekend. I promise. Richard's jaw worked, the glass fogging slightly from his breath. He nodded, unable to speak. When the guard announced time, they each raised a hand to the glass, 5 fingers spread, a childhood gesture of farewell. Driving home, Daniel marked the calendar on his fridge, a red circle around Saturday. The count of visits had begun. 6 months blurred into 12. The visits had found their rhythm, the same hard bench, the same black phone, the parish bulletin folded in Daniel's pocket. Father Thomas asked about you again. I told him you're doing Bible study.
It helps. The chaplain runs a group on forgiveness. I'm learning to look at myself in the mirror.
He unfolded the bulletin on the metal counter between them, the crease worn from a week in his pocket. I never had your headstone removed, you know. I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Maybe that's a sign. We'll figure it out when I'm out.
Daniel pressed his palm flat against the glass, and on the other side, Richard mirrored the gesture. The guard's announcement echoed off the cinderblock walls. Reeves, time. Richard mouthed every other weekend and nodded once, the glass blurring his face. Daniel slipped the bulletin back into his pocket and walked toward the exit, the calendar in his kitchen waiting like a countdown. 3 weeks before the release date, Daniel opened the guest room door, the first time the handle had turned since the funeral. 12 years of dust and empty hangers. Clean sheets and a cross. That's where we start. He placed a simple wooden cross on the nightstand, then smoothed the quilt Margaret had embroidered years ago. That Sunday at Mass, Daniel knelt through the Eucharistic prayer with a lighter heart, the old weight of anger loosening. Lord, I've been angry at you for so long. I think I'm ready to let that go. For the first time in months, he crossed to the confessional, the old wood cool against his fingers. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been a long time. I've been angry at God for 12 years. I think I'm ready to let it go." Through the screen, a calm, aged voice replied, "The Lord of Resurrection is gentle with our grief. Go in peace." Daniel knelt again at the pew. The old stiffness in his spine had eased, replaced by something that felt like hope. At the votive rack, he lit a candle for Richard's safe return, the flame small and steady in the sanctuary dark. Daniel leaned against his sedan, the morning sun warming his charcoal coat, eyes fixed on the prison gate like a man watching a resurrection. The buzz of the release mechanism cut the silence. The gate rolled open, and Richard stepped through, a small duffel in one hand, no longer an inmate. They met halfway across the asphalt. No words, just an embrace that squeezed 12 years of grief into a single breath. Daniel felt the thinness of Richard's shoulders, the tremor of his breath. He held tighter, as if to convince himself this was real. In the car, the radio played a soft classical piece. Richard stared out the window at passing trees, a free man relearning the world. Daniel drove with one hand, the other resting on the bench seat between them, an unspoken invitation Richard finally took. They pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it had for years, but somehow, with Richard beside him, it felt different. Daniel opened the guest room door. The cross, the quilt, the morning light falling across the bed, all waiting. Richard stood in the doorway, his duffel slipping to the floor. He walked to the bed, sat down, and wept, the first free tears in 12 years. Daniel stood behind him, a hand on his shoulder, letting the silence say what words couldn't. Home, at last. Tuesday morning, Daniel walked into St. Anthony's with Richard at his side, 2 brothers, one familiar pew. He gestured to the 6th row, the exact spot where a stranger had once whispered, "Don't react." The priest's homily read from Luke, "Rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep." Richard looked over. Daniel's eyes were closed, hands clasped, a faint smile on his face. At the closing prayer, they knelt together. Daniel's hand covered Richard's on the wood. They crossed themselves in unison as the final blessing fell, a gesture learned in childhood. After the last amen, they walked to the votive rack, the candles flickering like waiting prayers.
One for gratitude, one for forgiveness.
For the years we lost, and the years we have left. Their wicks met a single flame, and 2 new lights rose, steady in the dark sanctuary. In the afternoon they drove the old road to the cemetery, the iron gate standing open as it always had. Daniel led the way to the stone. The name Richard Reeves caught the low sun, unchanged by time. Every Sunday I'd stand here and talk to you. I never washed the stone. I wanted it to feel lived on. Richard knelt, and his fingertips found the grooves of his own name, the cold granite rough under his touch.
You should have had it removed.
No. It told the truth of my love, and now it tells the truth of your return.
Leave it. Let it be the one lie that God turned into a miracle.
They stood together in the long silence, the headstone a witness between them. The clouds parted, an afternoon sun broke across the cemetery, warming the grass that had covered an empty box for so long. A tear traced down Daniel's cheek, but his smile held. The stone was no longer a grave marker. It was a milestone. 2 weeks later, an official envelope arrived from the state. Daniel opened it at the kitchen table, Richard across from him. It's official. The restitution file is closed. We're square with the world.
I'll pay you back, somehow. Every cent.
You already have. You came home. That evening, they sat on the back porch, 2 Adirondack chairs creaking in the cooling air.
Father Thomas stopped by. He said the parish thrift store needs someone who can handle the books.
A fresh start, right where we belong. The next Sunday, Richard's name appeared on the parish bulletin as a volunteer. A small line, a quiet resurrection. Tuesday Mass continued. They never missed a week. The 6th row pew became their shared anchor. And when the priest raised the host, Daniel glanced at his brother, alive, forgiven, home, and bowed his head with a peace that needed no words. That night, the house settled into its quiet hum, and Richard appeared in the living room doorway, an old photo album under his arm.
I wasted 12 years, Dan. 12 years we can't get back.
The past is a debt you've already paid. We have today. He pulled the album onto his lap, and the pages fell open to a photograph neither had touched since 1987.
Remember that fishing trip? You told me the worm was a prize-winning species.
Laughter filled the room. Rusty at first, then warm and easy, the way it used to be before the fire. Daniel's fingers brushed his gold wedding band, the lamplight catching its dull shine. Margaret's presence still felt. Good night, old man.
Good night, big brother.
Daniel clicked off the lamp, and the house settled around them, no longer a house of absence, but a house of two beating hearts. The final Tuesday of Easter arrived, and the church was washed in gold light, lilies still fragrant on the altar. The priest opened the gospel, "The dead in Christ shall rise first." Daniel glanced at Richard, whose head was bowed, but whose lips moved with the familiar words. During the general intercessions, a prayer rose. For those returned to us from afar, we give thanks. Richard's hand, resting on the pew, turned slightly, a silent acknowledgement. At the final blessing, they made the sign of the cross in unison, a gesture worn smooth by decades. The congregation rose, filing toward the doors, but the two men in the sixth row remained kneeling. Daniel's hands, clasped around his wedding band, rested on the wood, a life of loss and love in the creases of his knuckles. Finally they stood, exchanged a look that needed no explanation, and walked out into the afternoon as the church bells began to ring. The sound of the bells carried across the parish grounds, and for the first time in years, neither man looked back. Later that afternoon, Daniel walked the cemetery path alone, a small bundle of white roses in his hand. He knelt before the stone and laid the roses against the granite, the petals bright against the gray. "Thank you for coming back." His fingertips traced the carved letters one last time, then he rose without the old weight. At the cemetery gate, Richard leaned against the iron, hands in his pockets, watching the sun sink. He didn't ask what Daniel had said. They just fell into step, the old gate creaking shut behind them. The lane was quiet, their footsteps the only sound, two long shadows stretching behind them in the gold light. They didn't hurry. After 12 years of silence, there was no need to rush. Behind them, the headstone remained, no longer a mark of loss, but a witness to a love that outlasted the fire. The road curved toward home, and the bells of St. Anthony's began to toll the evening angelus, a familiar rhythm calling the world to rest.